The story continues in Mark chapter 2, verse 23. It came to pass, he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath, and they ate. The Pharisees complained. Chapter 6 of Luke, and it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn, rubbing them in their hands. The Pharisees complained. This story is in Matthew, but it's not in Matthew 9, it's in Matthew 12. Beginning of chapter 12. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they complained. In all three Gospels, this word corn is underlined, and there's a note saying grain. Matthew 12 says, at that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day. Mark, and it came to pass that he went through the corn fields on the Sabbath day. So the corn is not mentioned until a bit later in the verse in Matthew. Sabbath day is mentioned after the cornfields in Mark. It begins with, and it came to pass, as opposed to at that time. So this is, when it says at that time in Matthew, it seems to be saying it's right after what happened before. But I already know, based on the timeline from Mark and Luke, that this does not happen when it says it happened in Matthew. So I don't think I want to use those words at that time from Matthew. I'll say it came to pass. Or I could say at that time, because I am putting it in the right place. I could say both. It came to pass at that time. No, those are two different introductory phrases. I don't think I want to put both. What does Luke say? Chapter 6. And it came to pass. Look at that. To say it came to pass. So I guess I'll just have to go with that. I wanted to go with that anyway. On the second Sabbath after the first. That works out rather well because it is more descriptive of when. So the second Sabbath after the first. And I guess I'll go with what Matthew and Luke say. They talk about the time. It was on a Sabbath, and then they mention what is happening, that they went through the fields. So I will start with, and it came to pass. Both Mark and Luke, dark yellow, and it came to pass. Mark, I believe Mark just continues on. No, Mark has a comma. Luke just continues on the second Sabbath after the first. Oh, that's because in Mark it goes into what is happening, as opposed to continuing on with the explanation of the timing. So for that, I think I'll save that comma for after the whole introduction being when, and just before he goes through the cornfields, as it has in Mark, but I'll be using the timing from Luke, the mentioning of the second Sabbath first. So in Matthew it says, Jesus went on the Sabbath day. Mark says he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. I already know I'm going to mention the Sabbath day first, so I would put that he went on the Sabbath day through the cornfields, but it's still he in Mark as opposed to Jesus. In Luke, it doesn't mention Jesus at all. It just says he came to pass on the second Sabbath at first that he went through the cornfields. So I'm not putting Jesus' name in yet. I'm just going to continue on with the time, the introduction to when. And it came to pass. I'll go with how Luke says it in the second Sabbath after the first. Then Luke continues, that he went through the cornfields. Mark, that he went through the cornfields. Matthew, it has earlier, Jesus went, a little bit later, through the cornfields. Also it has that time, Jesus went. So I could say that coming up. It does come from Matthew as well. If I wanted to include the words from Matthew, just because they're words from Matthew, I think now would be a good time, after I say on the second Sabbath after the first, and then go in at that time. It's really unnecessary, but they are words from Matthew. Maybe I should put them. No, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. It's so not necessary. The next words are that Jesus went through the cornfields. So I can say the word that is from Matthew, because it's there as well. I'll use the comma from Mark, because that comma wasn't used yet. But there, I'll put it in. Came to pass that, and this that is in gray. It's from all three. Now, Jesus is only in Matthew. Oh, look at that. Okay. On the Sabbath day is in Matthew. So I'm going to say on the is not only Luke, but also Matthew. I'll change that to orange. It's a little out of order in regards to Matthew, but that's okay. And I'll add day. It's not really harming anything. So Sabbath is both Matthew and Luke, and after it, I'll add the word day in red, because it's only from Matthew. So now it reads, "And it came to pass on the second Sabbath day after the first, that Jesus," and I'll continue on with "went through the cornfields." Yeah, that's fine. That Jesus went and through, they're both in Matthew, they're separated a bit, went through the corn. Fields is not in Matthew though. Went through the corn fields. So went through the corn is both in Matthew and Mark. Went through the corn. Went through the corn. That's all three. Went through the corn. And then fields is in Luke. Fields in Mark. So fields is Mark and Luke, dark yellow. Mark says then on the Sabbath, so there's no need for any comma. But there is a colon after Sabbath day. Oh, look at that day. That's right. I forgot on the Sabbath day. On the is not just Matthew, Luke. It's all three. It's out of order in regards to Matthew and Mark, but it's in order for Luke. So I'll just put this in gray. Sabbath day. So Sabbath is gray. Day is Matthew and Mark. Still reads the same. It's just showing that these words are coming from more than just one or two places. Went through the corn fields. And there is a semicolon after that. So Luke and Mark, a semicolon, and it goes on to say, and his disciples, and his disciples, and his disciples. So look, that's in all three. So fields, gray, even beginning at the semicolon is all gray. And his disciples were hungry. Matthew began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. So were hungry is only Matthew. I don't know how that's going to fit though, because in both Mark and Luke, it goes on to say his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat. I don't know where to fit "were hungry" in there. I could say his disciples were hungry, plucked the ears of corn, and did eat, which would sort of fit. Yeah, that'd have to be it. I should go in Matthew. Were hungry and began. That would fit. Were hungry and began. In Mark it says began. His disciples began as they went. That works fine. His disciples, so only Matthew, were hungry. And then began is in Matthew. Began to pluck the ears of corn. Began, as they went to pluck the ears of corn. So began is Matthew, Mark. Disciples began, pluck the ears of corn. No, just began is only Matthew, Mark. Began. Then Mark only has as they went. Matthew just says began to pluck. Began as they went to pluck. Yeah, as they went. So Mark only, as they went. Well, there's a comma after began. Yeah. Mark only, comma. As they went, comma. To pluck the ears of corn. To pluck the ears of corn. Luke is different. Plucked the ears of corn. I'm definitely going to say to pluck because you can't say began plucked. So to pluck is Matthew and Mark only. The ears of corn. The ears of corn. The ears of corn. All three. The ears of corn. Matthew ends in a comma and then another phrase, and to eat. Mark just ends there with a period. Luke has a comma, and did eat, instead of just and to eat. And then another phrase, rubbing them in their hands. So I'm definitely having that, rubbing their hands. I'm definitely having this phrase before it, but how to say it? And to eat or and did eat? Because it has this extra phrase at the end, rubbing them in their hands, I think that means it would have to be as is written in Luke with this phrase, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands, because this is how they ate. So it would be an explanation of what they did, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. If I say, and to eat, rubbing their hands, it would say how they were doing it as well, and to eat. I guess I could just pick, and began to, I have to pick. To pluck and to eat, rubbing their hands. That might make more sense. Began as they went to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. They're not just plucking the ears of corn, they're also eating. To would fit from before pluck and before eat. To pluck and did eat. They were hungry and began as they went to pluck the ears of corn and did eat. So to would fit better because they're both saying to pluck. But again, I think because of this last phrase, it would fit better with did. Yeah, I remember actually a debate between, I think it was Michael something. I forget his name, but it was a very good debate between a Messianic Jew and a non-Messianic Jew about Jesus, about Yeshua, and whether or not Jesus fulfilled the Torah, the law, the prophecies, and if he actually could have qualified as the Messiah. And one of the arguments was this one about Jesus eating on the Sabbath. And I remember someone else explaining, maybe I read this, that when you're eating, if you have food in your hand, but it's mixed up with gravel or dirt, like if you've grabbed it off the ground, it would not be acceptable for you to pick out the food and to eat it, because that's gathering food, as God commanded against. You can't go out and gather food on the Sabbath day. But you could grab the rocks, the dirt out of the food, and then eat the food, because that's not gathering food. I don't even know how they would explain it. You're sifting. You're not sifting. You're cleansing. You're cleaning, if you will. I don't really know how they would explain it, but that's okay. And he was saying that what Jesus was doing and his disciples rubbing them in their hands is not a violation of what God said. That, I don't know, maybe the rubbing to get the wheat germ, perhaps? I'm not sure. The part that they would eat off of the part that they wouldn't eat there. Qualified. Or even if it didn't, he's Jesus. He's the Lord of the Sabbath, as explained later. He can do that. But I don't think that, even that, changes how I would have this written. No, I think I'll still go with how it says in Luke, and did eat. But and has a comma. Nope, it's just a comma, orange, between Matthew and Luke, comma, and now Luke only did, back to both, orange, eat, and then only Luke has a comma in the next phrase. Matthew just ends in a period. So now it's only Luke. Rubbing them in their hands. You know, that actually sounds kind of wrong. To pluck the ears of corn, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Because in Luke, it doesn't say to pluck, it says plucked the ears of corn, and did eat. You know, I'm going to change it back to 2. This is now Matthew only. 2. As they went to pluck the ears of corn and to eat, rubbing them in their hands. Yeah. I guess I had to look at it as well as read it in order to really get an opinion.